Section 11 of A Cruising Voyage Around the World. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Recording by Kay Hand. A Cruising Voyage Around the World by Woodes Rogers. At Guiaquil, Part 2. April 27th. Yesterday, about 2 in the afternoon, our prisoners returned with 2 men on horseback from the enemy's sorry camp, and told us the agreement was concluded as we last proposed, that if we suspected them, they would stay for hostages, and that the lieutenant of Puna, who as a messenger forwarded the treaty, with an old gentleman already on board our bark, were to be the other 2. We contented ourselves with the latter, and let the 2 strangers return to their camp with our messenger, who was to bring back the agreement signed. But they sent another back to us, signifying that we had omitted to take notice that the town was taken by force of arms, which we afterwards inserted both in the Spanish and English paper. This morning the Spanish agreement was brought back signed by 'em, and we sent ours in English signed to them as follows. Whereas the City of Guiaquil, lately in subjection to Philip V. King of Spain, is now taken by storm, and in the possession of the Captains Thomas Dover, Woodes Rogers, and Stephen Courtney, commanding a body of Her Majesty of Great Britain's subjects. We the underwritten are content to become hostages for the said city, and to continue in the custody of the said Captains, Thomas Dover, Woodes Rogers, and Stephen Courtney, till 30,000 pieces of 8 shall be paid to them for the ransom of the said city, 2 new ships and 6 barks; during which time no hostility is to be committed on either side between this and Puna. The said sum to be paid at Puna in 6 days from the date hereof, and then the hostages to be discharged, and all the prisoners to be delivered immediately; otherwise the said hostages do agree to remain prisoners till the said sum is discharged in any other part of the world. In witness whereof we have voluntarily set our hands, this 27th day of April, Old Style, at the 7th of May, S.N., in the year of our Lord 1709. The 2 hostages lay this night at our quarters, and we shipped 'em off, with all we had got together, by 11 o'clock, and marched towards our barks with our colours flying, while the Spaniards returned to their houses. I marched on the rear with a few men, and picked up pistols, cutlasses, and poleaxes, which shewed that our men were grown very careless, weak, and weary of being soldiers, and that 'twas time to be gone from hence. The hardest work we had was to get the guns down to the water, the earth being so soft, that they who helped to carry them sunk half leg deep. To make it as easy as I could, I contrived a frame of bamboo canes, under which 60 men could stand, and bear equal weight on their shoulders. Though they were large 4-pounders, the gun and the frame did not exceed 15 sea weight, but had not the prisoners we took helped us, though it had been an easy task in a cold country, I could hardly have picked men enough of our own for the work. John Gabriel, one of my company, a Dutchman, was missing. April 28. Yesterday in the afternoon we settled every thing on board the barks as well as we could, and separated our men aboard the prizes, where we had put most of our town goods and plunder, being about 230 bags of flour, beans, peas, and rice, 15 jars of oil, about 160 jars of other liquors, some cordage, ironware, and small nails, with about 4 half jars of powder, about a ton of pitch and tar, a parcel of clothing and necessaries, and, as I guess, about 1200 pounds in plate, earrings, &c., and 150 bales of dry goods, 4 guns, and about 200 Spanish ordinary useless arms and musket barrels, a few packs of indigo, cocoa, and anoto, with about a ton of loaf sugar. We left abundance of goods in the town, besides liquors of most sorts, and sea stores, with several warehouses full of cocoa, divers ships on the stocks, and 2 new ships unrigged upwards of 400 ton, which cost above 80,000 crowns, and then lay at anchor before the town. We are also to deliver 4 barks ashore, and leave 2 here to bring down the ransom. By this it appears the Spaniards had a good Bargain, but this Ransom was far better for us than to burn what we could not carry off. About 2 yesterday Afternoon our Dutchman that was missing rose out of his Brandywine Fit, and came aboard. He was disturbed by the honest Man of the House where he lay, who first called in his Neighbours, and cautiously seized his Arms, then gently raised him, and when his Eyes were open, told him there was his Arms again, and bid him hasten aboard to us. This is the only Man that I know of since we took Guiaquil, who had so much transgressed our Orders by drinking beyond his bearing. This Morning about 8 we weighed and sailed with all our Barks, and at parting made what shew and noise we could with our Drums, Trumpets, and Guns, and thus took our leave of the Spaniards very cheerfully, but not half so well pleased as we should have been, had we taken 'em by surprise. For I was well assured from all hands, that at least we should have got above 200,000 Pieces of 8 in Money, wrought and unwrought, Gold and Silver, besides Jewels, and a greater plenty of such Necessaries as we now found, though the Place has not been poorer these 40 Years, by reason that a sudden Fire about 18 months ago had destroyed the better half of the Town, which is now mostly rebuilt. Before I go any further, 'tis proper to describe the Town. A Description of Guiaquil. 'Tis the Metropolis of its Province, about 1.5 miles long, and divided into Old and New, joined by a wooden Bridge above half a mile in length, but passable only by people on foot. There are some Houses at a distance on each side the Bridge, and those of both Towns may be about 400 or 500 in the whole, besides 5 Churches, and the Inhabitants about 2000 in all. Their chief Church is that of St. Jago, or St. James the Apostle, which has 7 Altars, and before it a handsome Square. The others are those of St. Augustin, St. Francis, St. Dominic, and St. Ignatius; the latter belongs to the Jesuits. Before that of St. Dominic, which is not quite finished, there is also a Square, with a half Moon, upon which they formerly planted Guns, but none were mounted there when we took it. 3 of these Churches were very lofty, one of them of Stone, and all adorned with Altars, carved Work, Pictures, &c. and there was an Organ in that of St. Augustin, but the Priests and their Scholars had carried off all the Plate belonging to those Churches, and retired with it into the Woods before we landed. Some of the Houses of the Town were very high, several built of Brick, but most of them of Timber, and the meaner sort of Bamboes. There is but one regular Street along the side of the River to the Bridge, and from thence along the Old Town. The situation is in a low boggy Soil, so dirty in the Winter, that without the Bridge they could scarce go from one House to another. The Town is governed by a Corregidor, who is their chief Magistrate, and appointed by the King. His name was Don Hieronimo Bos, a young Man of about 24 Years of Age, and a Native of the Canaries. The Town is well seated for Trade and building of Ships, for which they have Sheds to cover the Workmen from the Sun. It lies 14 Leagues up from Point Arena, and 7 from Puna. The River is large, receives several others, has many Villages and Farm Houses on its Banks, with abundance of Mangroves and Sarsaparilla, which impregnates its Water, and makes it good against the French Pox; but in the time of Floods it is unwholesome because of the poisonous Roots and Plants washed down from the Mountains. They have plenty of Provisions, black Cattle, Sheep, Goats, Swine, Poultry, several sorts of Ducks unknown in Europe, and store of Horses. The Water of the River is fresh at low Water, almost as far as Puna. An Englishman who lived here some time came over to us, inform'd us of many Particulars, and told us that in December last they had 3 Weeks Rejoicings for the Births of the Prince of Asturias, when they muster'd 1100 Foot and 500 Horse in Arms, besides a much greater number that had none, but most of those Troops came from the adjacent Country. During this Solemnity they baited many Bulls to death, after the manner of Spain, and run at the Ring, &c. which are their chief Diversions. He told us likewise that Ships are frequently built here for the King. The Hostages inform'd us, that during the Treaty, $80,000 of the King's Money was sent out of the Town, besides their Plate, Jewels, and other things of greatest value; but they were robb'd of a great deal by the Blacks, to whom they had given it in the hurry to carry off. We took several of 'em with stolen Goods, as we went the rounds by night; and therefore we made a Signal to the Inhabitants to return, as we march'd off, that they might not suffer any more loss by those Villains. The French, by their commerce in these seas, as the Spaniards in general told us, damaged their trade so much, that their Sea Ports are sensibly impoverish'd, and this Town was much richer 6 years ago than now. A mile below I took my leave of the Barks, with the Pinnace double mann'd, designing to get before them to the Ships at Point Arena. The Day came on very hot, and we saw many Alligators in the River. April 29. Last Night I reach'd Puna, and met Mr. Duck and Mr. Hatley in the beginning, and an empty Bark which the Duke's Yawl had taken in our Absence; the Spaniards having run ashore and left her at anchor off Point Arena. Our People were concerned at our being absent so long, and hearing no News of us; the Scarcity of Water had made 'em give the Prisoners but a Pint a day for some time, and they sunk the last small Prize we took coming from Payta, to prevent the Prisoners running away with her, for they had not men to spare for manning her themselves. By Day light I got aboard, where I found all our People overjoyed at our meeting again, after 12 Days Absence on undertakings subject to so many fatal Accidents, which we happily escaped. Captain Cook and Frye were very uneasy in our Absence, and had their full share of Care and Fatigue. They usually gave the Prisoners Liberty by Day, but kept their Arms always ready, and the after part of the Ships to themselves. At Night they shut 'em up in the Forecastle, or between Decks, but aboard the Prize, which was not so secure, they put them in Irons every Evening, and let 'em out in the Morning; but never suffered any Correspondence between the Prisoners in the several Ships, by which means they neither knew their own Strength nor our Weakness, any further than in the respective Ships they were confined to. Roger Booth, one of the Dutchess's Men, who was wounded through his Windpipe in the Engagement with the Havre de Grace, died the 20th instant. William Essex, a stout Sailor, one of our Quartermasters, being wounded in the Breast in the same Fight, died the 24th instant. So that out of both Ships we lost 4 good Men, including my dear Brother, by that Engagement. Mr. James Stratton, a Quartermaster belonging to the Dutchess, that was wounded at the same time, by a Musket Ball in his Thigh, is now out of danger. The wounded in these parts are more frequently attended with Fevers, and other dangerous Accidents, than in Europe. April 30. About 3 yesterday afternoon a Sail from under the Main appear'd in sight running up the Channel to Guiaquil. Captain Cook sent the Havre de Grace's Boat in pursuit of her, but my Pinnace sailing better, followed and took her before Sunset. She was a Bark of above 30 Tuns, from Sania, called the Francisco de la Salma, Signor Jacomo de Brenes Master, with 6 Men on board. She was laden with about 270 Bags of Flowers, Beans, and Peas, near 200 Sugar Loaves, several Frails of Quinces, Marmalet, Sugar Plums, and other sweet Meats, with a good quantity of large Pomegranates, Apples, and Onions, a little of this Country Cheese, and dried Beef. They had been out 7 days, and heard nothing of us, but confirmed the story of an English Squadron expected in these Seas, and that there were several stout French Ships in their Harbours, particularly 2 at Lima, and 1 at Pisco, besides others in the Harbours of Chile; that at Chinipe, whence they came, being the Sea Port to Sania, there was a strict Order lately sent from Lima to the chief Officer there, to be on his guard, and keep continual watch in the same manner as I have before noted, in the Order we found directed to the Lieutenant or Governor of Puna. This Morning at 7 the Beginning came to an anchor by us, from Puna, with a few Jars of Waters, which we mightily wanted. Mr. Goodall and others told me, there were no other Barks coming down but what went up with his, from the Ships for water, and that he did not know the reason why the rest stayed there. He told me he had a Letter from Captain Courtney to his Second, Captain Cook, but no Message or Letter from him or Captain Dover to me; adding, he heard one of them say that they expected this Bark would meet the Ships half way coming up to Puna, and that they looked for me hourly. This unexpected Story surprized me, but I suppose they might have some hopes of disposing our Cargo to the Spaniards at Guiaquil, which occasioned their staying, and expectation of my return. I discoursed it with Captain Cook and Mr. Frye, and saw Captain Courtney's Letter, but not of a word of advice to me. However, I resolved to hasten away the Beginning with some Negroes (the most troublesome Goods we had) to dispose of, that they might be at Puna before me. I began to unmoor the Havre de Grace, in order to go up with the Flood, hoping to sell her Cargo, or good part of it, while our Ships took in Water, resolving to save as much time as possible. Meanwhile, The other water bark arrived, but without any manner of advice to me when those above designed to come down, or to send the Men that were so much wanting aboard, to put things in order for our going to sea. May 1. Yesterday in the Afternoon I took Sen. Morell for a Pilot, and weighed with the Havre de Grace; but having little Wind, and being neap Tides, I did not get 1/3 of the way up to Puna with that Flood. I was likewise but ill manned, because I was obliged to leave the Pinnace and Crew that came down with me for the security of our Ship. We weighed again with the Morning Flood, and met the Dutchess's Bark coming down, but without the least Advice to me from the 2 Captains at Puna, which farther confirm'd me that they waited for my Company and the Ship to sell her Goods. I was pleased at the thoughts of this, for I concluded that had it been otherwise, one or both of them would have come down, or have sent all the Barks except one to stay for the Ransom. We were forced to anchor again before high Water, and the Tide shot us over towards the Island. There is a shoal Sand above half way up to Puna, near Mid Channel, over on that side, which 'tis difficult to avoid, unless we have a commanding Gale to keep in the Channel which is nearest the Main. 'Tis the Starboard shore as you go up, and there are gradual Soundings on both sides to the Shoal on the Larboard side, or the Main Land on the Starboard side, keeping between 4 and 7 Fathom Water. The Coast clear of all is North East up the Channel, bearing about 2 large Leagues off Port Arena, where it's bold, and all athwart, till we get 2 Leagues higher than Point Arena, and as we come against, or a little above, the white chalky Cliff, near the Point or upper end, and the highest part of the Island of Puna, we must haul over for the Island, and come to an anchor before the Houses, that are plain to be seen, when we get above the high Point, which is easily known, because all the Land on the Island is even with the Water, and elsewhere there's nothing to be seen but Trees, down to the River. We must keep nearest the Starboard shore going up, which is the only Channel for Ships. 'Tis above 8 Leagues from Point Arena to the Town of Puna, which lies on the upper end of the Island of that Name. May 2. We got up to an anchor before Puna, by 10 this Morning, where I found 4 of the Barks that came down from Guiaquil. Captain Dover and Courtney came on board, and contrary to expectation told me they had not heard one word from the Spaniards since we left them. This being the last day appointed for payment, a Boat came and brought us upwards of 22,000 Pieces of 8, in part of the Ransom, which we immediately received, and dispatched the Boat back, telling them we designed to leave this place in the Morning, and would carry off the Hostages, if they did not come time enough with the rest of the Money to prevent it. May 3. Yesterday in the Afternoon Captain Courtney took charge of the Havre de Grace, and I agreed to follow him in the Morning to Point Arena, after I had shipped off 7 live Black Cattle, some Sheep, Hogs, and Fowls, with a good quantity of Plantains, about 80 Jars and some Casks of Water, 24 Packs of Cocoa, 2 Sails, and 4 large Blass Petteroes. 2 Barks sailed about midnight with the Marquiss. I began again early in the Morning, and by 9 got all aboard. We agreed to leave the Lieutenant of Puna here, giving him 4 old sick Negroes, and a damaged Bale of Goods, for what we had taken from him, being a Man we had some Respect for. We also parted very friendly with several of our Prisoners we took at Sea, particularly an old Padre that I had treated civilly at my own Table, ever since we took him, for which he was extremely thankful. About a league before the Town I saw the Havre de Grace at anchor, near the edge of a shoal, and the Dutchess's Pinnace coming from her, with Captains Courtney, Dover, and Dampier, who had quitted the Havre de Grace, and desired to exchange with me, which I did. May 5. I went aboard the Havre de Grace about 2 in the Afternoon, and got her out of danger into the Channel, but came to an anchor again, by the advice of Sen. Morell and the Indian Pilot. I encouraged 'em and the Men to assist me as much as possible to get her under Sail, because we were in haste to be gone, but there being little Wind, I could not make use of half the Ebb, before I was again in shoal Water, and came to an anchor, where for the want of Wind we lay for the rest of these 24 hours. May 5. This Morning I got the length of our Ships again, and soon after Day went aboard the Duke, being quite sick by my long Fatigue. Captain Courtney came to me aboard, and we agreed to throw the Timber and great Boat between Decks in the Galleon overboard, to make room for the Flour and Guiaquil Goods which were yet in the Barks. We gave the Flour prize to the Prisoners whom we let go, to carry to the Inhabitant of Guiaquil, and took in as much Water as we could get. Most of it was fetched half way above Puna in the River towards Guiaquil, and though but very indifferent, we had not half enough for want of time. May 6. Our Hostages are very uneasy, fearing the Money will not come in time to redeem them, and it's worse than Death, they say, to be carried to Great Britain. We got all aboard last Night by 7 a Clock, our People being fatigued. I was willing to rest myself and them one Night before we sailed, but Captain Courtney was in too much haste, and my second, Captain Dover, and my Pilot Dampier, forsook me to go along with him. They sailed at midnight with the Havre de Grace, leaving me and the rest at anchor. Mr. Connely, who went in the Bark for water, did not return till the morning, when we saw our Consort and Prize at anchor, for the Weather falling calm they did not get 2 Leagues from us that ebb. At high water, about 10 this morning, all the rest of us came to sail. Our small Bower Cable was cut with the foul Ground, and we lost our Anchor. I endeavour'd, but in vain, to convince the other Captains that we were not yet in any danger from the Enemy, because it was not possible that the French and Spaniards could have notice of us, and arm out time enough from Lima to attack us. May 7. Yesterday about 4 in the Afternoon we came to an Anchor again in 13 Fathom Water about 4 Leagues below Point Arena. At 2 this Morning, with a very small Breeze, we came to sail. Sometime after, Signor Morel, that went up with us to Guiaquil from Puna, and a Gentleman of that Town related to our Prisoners, brought us about 3500 Pieces of 8 in Plate towards the Ransom. They came as far as Point Arena in a Boat, and thence followed in one of the 4 Barks that we left by agreement. May 8. Yesterday in the Afternoon we discharged all our Prisoners, except the Morels, a little Dutchman, and a Gentleman's Son of Panama, with our Indian Pilots, that I took aboard to amuse the People of Guiaquil, that we should return thither, and 2 more that desired to stay with us, besides the 3 Ransomers. The Gentleman that came from Guiaquil had a Gold Chain and some other Movables, with which he purchased the beginning of us, and we gave the Captain of the Havre de Grace 3 Negro Women, and Signor Morel and Signor Ignatius 1 a piece, and to all of them good part of their wearing Apparel. So that we parted very friendly. They told us, a Prisoner we put ashore at Puna, called Signor Don Pedro Cienfuegos, was a Man of great Credit at Guiaquil, that he had got a good sum together, before they came thence in order to buy Goods of us, and that they expected him in less than 12 hours; adding, that there were several others coming down to trade with us, but the majority of our Officers would not believe him, being resolved to make the utmost Dispatch for the Galapagos Islands. They pressed to know where they might meet us to trade, but every one was against informing them of the place where we designed to rendezvous, lest they should discover it to the Enemy Ships of War. At 8 last Night we came to an Anchor in 16 Fathom Water. The Island Sancta Clara bore N. E. by N. 5 Leagues. At 2 this Morning we weighed with the Flood, Wind at S.W. at 6, the Island bore N. by E. 4 Leagues distance. A Description of the Province of Guiaquil. The City or Town of Guiaquil is the Metropolis of a Province of that Name in Peru, governed by a President with 5 or 6 Orders, which makes a Royal Audiencia, or Chief Court of Judicature, accountable only to the Viceroy in military Affairs. Every Province has a Government of the same nature. These Governors are commonly appointed, or, to speak more properly, purchase their Offices in Old Spain, for Life or good Behaviour; and in case any die, or misbehave themselves, the Viceroy may name another during his time, which ought to be but 5 years; but sometimes he gets these Officers of his own placing, confirm'd by an Order from Spain, which is a considerable part of the Viceroy's unknown Profits. The late Viceroy continued 14 years, several new ones having died by the way. The King of Spain himself scarce lives in more Splendor than his Viceroy in the City of Lima, where the chief Courts of Judicature are kept, and Appeals are brought thither from all Courts and Provinces of this extensive Kingdom. I should not here mention the vast Wealth the late Viceroy obtained during his Government, the Sum being so large that I thought it fabulous, but that I was inform'd of it by so many hands, who told me, that about 4 years ago he died at least worth 8,000,000 Pieces of 8, and left it to his Widow and Children, but the greatest part to his eldest Son, the Conde de la Monclo, besides vast Sums he gave away in Charity, during his Lifetime, and the many Churches, Friaries, and Nunneries that he built. He left a better Character behind him than any Viceroy has done for an Age past. The Conde, his eldest Son, waits here, expecting to succeed the present Viceroy of Peru or Mexico, if the Government holds in Old Spain, but I and every Englishman ought earnestly to hope that King Charles III. will happily recover that monarchy, and gratefully place a viceroy here that will shew himself as good a friend to the English trade as the present viceroy does to the French, for he openly espouses their interest and encourages them, whereas the Spaniards say he racks and heavily oppresses their own countrymen. The corregidor that last died at Guiaquil, though he had possessed the office but 5 years, had raked together 300,000 pieces of eight, though his post was not allowed to exceed above 2,000 pieces of eight per annum. But all the corregidores make vast advantages by seizures and trading privately themselves. The trade to and from Mexico is forbid here under the severest penalty, especially transporting quicksilver from Peru thither, because quantities are brought from Old Spain which is imposed on the refiners at great rates. Here are many ships employed coasting in this Kingdom, but a Trade is so severely prohibited between 'em and Mexico, that all the Commodities with Silver and Gold in Returns, may have little other Circulation in these vast Countries, but by Flota and Galleons to and from Old Spain. Yet notwithstanding the severity used against private Traders, by the Viceroys and the Corregidores, there are some that use it, who have no mercy, shoot 'em if caught, all being seized in the King's name, though his Majesty has little or no share of it; all such seizures, as I am told, being divided amongst these Officers, and the poor Sufferer banished or confined to a Gaol. All English and Dutch Goods, except what comes by the Galleons, are prohibited here, so that the private Traders, after they have by stealth purchased 'em in the North Seas, must vend 'em in like manner all over Peru; and if the wholesale Merchants have not a good Certificate from the Commerce of Sevilla, that their Commodities came by the Flota or Galleons, whenever the Goods are questioned they must disown them, for fear of a worse Punishment, unless they have a good Interest in the Viceroy, which costs dear to purchase and preserve. So that the Trader makes little Profit, but where the chief Officers have a feeling; yet though these mercenary Viceroys are so severe on others, they themselves implore the Corregidores to negotiate a Trade for them by a third hand, which cannot be done to the purpose, without being publicly known; so that Ships are constantly employed on their account, and carry Quicksilver and all manner of prohibited Goods to and from Mexico out of by Ports. Thus being their own Judges, they get fast Estates, and stop all Complaints in Old Spain, by Bribes. The Goods they trade for have a free Passage and Sale through the Continent, whilst others, if they do but offer at it, are punish'd as above. Their other ways of getting Money unjustly are too many; but in short, and in my Opinion, there's no Country naturally more rich, nor any People more terribly oppressed. The Spaniards say, and I believe, not without reason, that a Viceroy, after purchasing his Place with all that he has, and quitting Old Spain as poor as Job, comes here like a hungry Lion, to devour all that he can; and that every Officer under him in the Provinces, who are 10 times more than are necessary, are his Jackals, to procure Prey for him, that they may have a share of it themselves. To this we may add, the Burthen of a numerous and luxurious Clergy, that indulge their Pride, Sloth, Effeminacy, and Bigotry, more than in Romish Countries of Europe; so that were this Country possessed by an industrious and well govern'd People, we might have reason to fear, that Silver and Gold would become so plentiful, and by consequence of so little Value, that the World would be at a loss to find a less troublesome and more acceptable Species to satisfy Avarice and Luxury. The River of Guiaquil, from about 2 Leagues above Puna to Point Arena, is so broad, that a Man can scarce see cross the Channel. The Land down to the Water side is low and covered with Mangrove Trees. The Tide flows above 3 Fathom, and an East and West Moon, as near as I could guess, makes high Water at Puna. The Tide has a quick Current, much stronger than in the Thames, and I believe the Ebb is a little inferior to that at Bristol, and the Water as thick and as much discolour'd. Not being able to describe the Channel plain enough to direct Strangers, I shall give a View of it from a Spanish Draught; for I had not time enough to draw the Channel, or found it all along. There's need of a good Pilot to carry a Vessel to the Town. The River is 14 Leagues navigable beyond it, and the Tide flows 20 Leagues above it, but Canoes and Bark Logs go much higher. The Province abounds with several sorts of good Timber, which makes it the chief Country of Peru for building and repairing Ships. There's seldom less than 6 or 7 at a time on the Stocks before the Town of Guiaquil. The chief Commodity this City and its Provinces afford is Cocoa, which is so plentiful, as to supply most Places on the South Sea. They say there's never less exported in a Year than 30,000 Carguas, each Cargua 81 Pound weight, and sometimes double the Quantity. It was purchased generally at half a Ryal per Pound, but now much cheaper, so that the Cargua may be bought for 2 Pieces of 8 and a half. Their coasting Trade is for Salt and Salt Fish, from Point Santa Helena, and most vended at Quito and other distant Places within Land. A vast quantity of Timber is laden here for Truxillo, Chancay, Lima, and other Sea Ports, where 'tis scarce. It pays a great Freight, and is a profitable Trade. They export also from hence Rice, Cotton, and some dryed jerked Beef. There are no Mines of Silver or Gold in this Province, but plenty of all sorts of Cattle, and very cheap, especially on the Island Puna, where we supply'd our selves with what we could stow conveniently. Here's no other Corn but Indian, so that all their Flour is brought from Truxillo, Cheripe, and other Places in the Windward Parts; it blows here always Southerly. They are also supply'd with several sorts of Woollen Cloth, and very good strong Bays made at Quito. Their Wine, Brandy, Oil, Olives, and Sugar, &c. come from Piscola, Nasca, and other Places to Windward. All sorts of European Goods come hither from Panama, whither they are brought over Land from Portobello out of the North Seas; so that the number of Ships that come and go from hence, without including the Coasters, are no less than 40 Sail every Year, which shews that the Port of Guiaquil is no mean Place of Trade in this part of the World. A Market is also kept on Bark Logs and Boats in the River every day before the Town, with all that the Country affords in great plenty. Having thus given an account of the Wealth and Trade of the Town and Province from my own Knowledge, or good Information, I shall now proceed to give a further account of the Strength and Government of the Province. The Corregidor is the Governor in all civil and military Affairs of the whole; the next is his Lieutenant, called by the Spaniards Lieutenant General, and all the chief Officers reside in or near Guiaquil. Their Method of trying civil and criminal Causes being different from ours, I shall give as clear an Idea of it as I can. When any Court is held, or urgent Affair happens, the following Persons are summoned to the Council in Guiaquil. First, the Corregidor, the Lieutenant General, 2 Alcaldes or Justices, who are generally men versed in the Law, and serve in the nature of Mayors and Justices by turn every Year. The next is the Alguazil Major, with 8 Regidores or common Councilmen, who supply the Room of the superior Officers, in case of Absence or Death, to the Viceroy's Pleasure be known; and always give their Votes in public Affairs. In cases of Law they are a standing Jury, and the Corregidor is Judge, but generally follows the Advice of the Alcaldes. The Plaintiff or Defendant may appeal after Trial to the Supreme Court of Lima, which is encouraged by the Gentlemen of the Law, who improve Suits to such a degree, that though they are almost as numerous as the Clergy, yet they are a thriving Society, seldom want Employment, and have large Fees. There are 2 Attorneys called Clerks of the Court, and 4 Alguazils or Serjeants. All Lawyers are allowed to practise here, and have a Salary from the King besides their Fees; and since Money abounds here, many of 'em don't scruple taking Fees on both sides. The Inquisition rages worse here than in Old Spain; their chief Court is at Lima, but 4 Officers from that Court are settled at Guiaquil, besides 24 Clergy belonging to the Town, who inform against any Person that they suspect of Opinions contrary to the Roman Church, and with a violent Zeal prosecute 'em almost without any Formality. The Offenders are speedily sent to the chief Court at Lima, where nothing but a great deal of Money can save 'em, if found guilty in the least degree. Their military Men affect great Titles, and their Strength is as follows. The Corregidore is General Don Hieronimo Boso. Master Le Camp, Don Christopher Romedeo de Oreno. Sergeant Major, Don Francisco Gantes. Commissaria de la Cavalaria, Don Antonio Calabria. They have 5 Dons, all Captains of the Infantry, and each of 'em a large Company. One Don is a Captain of near 200 Horsemen, and there are Lieutenants, Ensigns, Sergeants, Corporals, and Drummers to each Company, as customary among the Spaniards. By the most reasonable Computation of their Force, they could in a few days bring together 900 armed Horse and Foot Militia, and I was inform'd by them they had not less than 500 of these in a Body before we landed, and beat 'em out of the Town, there being always that number ready in the Towns and adjacent Parts upon an Alarm. These and many more formed a sorry Camp within a League of us in the Woods, whilst with about 160 Men we kept the Town till they ransom'd it. An Englishman that run over to us after the Fright, who had lived 2 Years in the Town and saw their Force, told us there were many more than what the Spaniards acknowledge by the above mentioned Account, and that he saw at one time, a few Months before, upwards of 1100 Horse and Foot drawn up and muster'd before the Town. Their other Towns are govern'd by Lieutenants deputed by the Corregidore; above half of 'em border on the same River and its Branches, so that they can join those of the Capital in 2 Tides, tho' at several Leagues distance. The Towns and Lieutenancies are as follows. A List of the Lieutenancy of this Province. Guiaquil, govern'd by a Lieutenant, distant from Guiaquil 7 Leagues. Bava 12 Leagues. Pimocho has 6 Brass Guns of 16 Pound Ball, both govern'd by the same Lieutenant, 14 Leagues. Puna, Naranjal, Machala, by the same Lieutenant, 9 Leagues, 14 Leagues, 14 Leagues. Daule, a Lieutenant, 7 Leagues. Point St. Helena, Colonche, Chongong, Chando, by the same Lieutenant, 30 Leagues, 20 Leagues, 7 Leagues, 10 Leagues. Sheba, Baboya, Chilintom, by the same Lieutenant, 21 Leagues, 16 Leagues, 14 Leagues. Porto Vaco, Charapeto, Pecoasa, Manta, Hepehapa, by the same Lieutenant, 34 Leagues, 36 Leagues, 25 Leagues, 40 Leagues, 30 Leagues. Porto Vaco was formerly the Metropolis of the Province, before the Government was removed to Guiaquil. In the Towns and the whole Province, the Spaniards compute at least 10,000 Inhabitants, but I believe there are many more. They are distinguished by themselves into 11 Classes or Sorts, which being particular and worth remarking, I shall add a Description of them for the Information of such as have not been in those Parts. The first and chief is the original Spaniards, never yet mixed with other People, at least as they pretend, and these are most respected. 2. The Mustees, begot by Spaniards on Indian Women. 3. Fino Mustees, their Children married again with the Spaniards. 4. Terceroons de Indies, their Children again mixed with the Spaniards. 5. Quarteroons de Indies, their Posterity again mixed with the Spaniards. The last are allowed to be primitive Spaniards again. 6. Mulattoes, begot by a Spaniard or any European on a Negro Woman. 7. Quarteroon de Negros, again mixed with Spaniards, and esteemed no better than Mulattoes. 8. Terceroon de Negros, a third mixture with the Spaniards, still called Mulattoes, because they will not allow 'em the privilege or title of Spaniard after once debased with the Negro breed, though some of 'em are as white as themselves; but they can't get off the ugly Name of Mulatto unless they hide their Descent, which is no hard Task, if they remove their Abode to another Place where they are not known; which is often practised and connived at by the Fathers of the Church, to increase the Number of good Catholic Spaniards. 9. The 9th Sort is Indians, who are all of a dark Olive tawny Colour. These, though the true and antient Proprietors of the Country, are placed a Class below the worst of the Spanish Descendants, which are generally begot without Marriage on their Servants and Slaves. 10. Negroes. 11. All the Species and Breeds between the Negroes and Indians are called Sambos, tho' by mixing their Breed as they do, they commonly differ little or nothing to the Eye from the Spanish mix'd Descendants. These 11 are the common Sorts, tho' some of 'em seem not very regularly distinguish'd; but they have rung Changes so often in those Peals of Generation, that there is no end of their Distinctions. The Spaniards are the fewest by far of all the Inhabitants, and were it not for those Mixtures, which the Fathers of the Church keep united, the Indians might again take possession of their Country, for the Spaniards would be too few to keep it, and much more uncapable of peopling it. Few of those Prisoners that fell into our Hands were healthy and sound; near half of the Spaniards discover'd publickly to our Doctors their Malady, in order to get Physick from them against the French Disease, which is so common here, that they reckon it no Scandal to be deep in the Powdering Tub; and the Heat of the Country facilitating the Cure, they make very light of it. All the Spaniards I discoursed allow that this rich Country is not a 10th peopled, nor are half the Indians far within Land civilized, tho' they affirm their King has in the West Indies more Subjects of several Colours, than in all Spain, or the rest of his Dominions in Europe. which may be true. And I believe they are such subjects as no Christian king can boast of, for the King of Spain is able to match the skins of his Americans to any color, with more variety and exactness than a draper can match his cloth and trimming. The account that the French buccaneers, alias pirates, gave of this place is so false that there's not the least truth in it, so that by their description it would not appear to be the same place, had they not left infamous marks of their being here. For when they took the town of Guiaquil about 22 years ago, they discovered little or no bravery in the attack, though they lost a great many men, and committed a great deal of brutishness and murder after they had the place in their power, which was above a month here and at Puna. The seasons here are improperly called winter and summer. The winter is reckoned from the beginning of December to the last of May, and all that season is sultry, hot, wet, and unhealthy. From the latter end of May to December 'tis serene, dry, and healthy, but not so violently hot as what they call winter. Their cocoa is ripe and most gathered between June and August, and of the other fruits natural to these climates some are ripe and others green all the year. But I return to my journal and the account of our voyage to the Galapagos Islands. May 11th. A fresh gale at S.S.W. We had upwards of 20 men that fell ill within these 24 hours, and our Consort near 50, of a malignant Fever, contracted as I suppose at Guiaquil, where I was informed that about a month or 5 weeks before we took it, a contagious Disease which raged there swept off 10 or 12 Persons every day for a considerable time; so that the Floors of all the Churches, which are their usual Burial Places, were filled so fast that they were obliged to dig a large and deep Hole of about a Rod square, close by the great Church where I kept guard, and this Hole was almost filled with Corpse half putrified. The mortality was so very great, that many of the People had left the Town, and our lying so long in the Church surrounded with such unwholesome Scents, was enough to infect us too. Captain Courtney was taken ill, and Captain Dover went on board the Dutchess to prescribe for him. May 14. This day we saw a great many Albacores in pursuit of flying Fish, and a very large Albacore leaped into one of our Boats. We have now about 50 Men down, and the Dutchess upwards of 70, but I hope the Sea Air, which is very fresh, will make the Climate more healthy. May 15. At 6 last night Mr. Samuel Hopkins, Dr. Dover's kinsman and assistant, died. He read prayers once a day ever since we passed the Equinox in the North Sea. He was a very good tempered, sober man, and very well beloved by the whole Ship's Company. May 17. This morning we saw the Land bearing S.S.W. about 10 Leagues distant. It seems a large Island and high Land. We tacked and stood E. by S. Wind at S. by E. to turn up to Windward for the Island. Our Men in both Ships continue very ill. We have near 66, and the Dutchess upwards of 80. We had a good Observation, Latitude 0° 37' South. May 18. At 6 last night, the end of the Island bore S. by E. distant about 5 Leagues. Edward Down died at 12 at night. When day broke, we were within 4 Leagues of 2 large Islands almost joining together, having passed the other that we saw yesterday. We sent our Boat ashore to look for water, and agreed with our Consort where to meet in case of separation. They turned towards an Island we saw to Windward, and left us to try this Island for water. All our Prizes were to stay near us under sail by a remarkable Rock. May 19. Yesterday in the Afternoon the Boat returned with a melancholy Account, that no Water was to be found. The Prizes we expected would have lain to Windward for us by the Rock, about 2 Leagues off shore, but Mr. Hatley in a Bark, and the Havre de Grace, turned to Windward after our Consort the Dutchess, so that only the Galleon and the Bark that Mr. Selkirk was in stayed for us. We kept playing to Windward all night with a light out, which they followed. At 5 in the Morning we sent our Boat ashore again to make a further search in this Island for water. About 10 in the Morning James Daniel, our Joiner, died. We had a good Observation, Latitude 0° 32' South. May 20. Yesterday in the Evening our Boat returned, but found no Water, though they went 3 or 4 miles up into the Country. They tell me the Island is nothing but loose Rocks like Cinders, very rotten and heavy, and the Earth so parched that it will not bear a Man, but breaks into holes under his feet, which makes me suppose there has been a Volcano here. Though there is much shrubby Wood and some Greens on it, yet there's not the least sign of Water, nor is it possible that any can be contained on such a Surface. At 12 last night we lost sight of our Galleon, so that we have only one Bark with us now. May 21. Yesterday in the Afternoon came down the Dutchess and the French Prize. The Dutchess's Bark had caught several Turtle and Fish, and gave us a part, which was very serviceable to the sick Men, our fresh Provisions that we got on the Main Land being all spent. They were surprised as much as we at the Galleon, and Hatley's Bark being out of sight, thinking before they had been with us. We kept Lights at our Top Mast's Head, and fired Guns all night, that they might either see or hear how to join us, but to no purpose. Captain Courtney being not yet quite recovered, I went on board the Dutchess, and agreed with him and his Officers to stay here with the Havre de Grace and Bark, whilst I went in quest of the missing Prizes. At 6 in the Morning we parted, and stood on a Wind to the Eastward, judging they lost us that way. Here are very strange Currents amongst these Islands, and commonly run to the Leeward, except on the full Moon I observed it ran very strong to Windward. I believe 'tis the same at Change. May 22. Yesterday at 3 in the Afternoon we met with the Galleon under the East Island, but heard nothing of Mr. Hatley's Bark. At 9 last night Jacob Scronder, a Dutchman, and very good Sailor, died. We kept on a Wind in the Morning to look under the Weather Island for Mr. Hatley, and fired a Gun for the Galleon to bear away for the Rendezvous Rock, which she did. May 23. Yesterday at 3 in the Afternoon we saw the Weather Island near enough, and no Sail about it. We bore away in sight of the Rock, and saw none but our Galleon. We were in another Fright, what became of our Consort, and the 2 Prizes we left behind, but by 5 we saw 'em come from under the shore to the Leeward of the Rock. We spoke with 'em in the Evening, we all bewailed Mr. Hatley, and were afraid he was lost. We fired Guns all night, and kept Lights out, in hopes he might see or hear us, and resolved to leave these unfortunate Islands after we had viewed 2 or 3 more to Leeward. We pitied our 5 Men in the Bark that is missing, who if in being have a melancholy life without water, having no more but for 2 days when they parted from us. Some are afraid they run on Rocks, and were lost in the Night, others that the 2 Prisoners and 3 Negroes had murder'd 'em when asleep; but if otherwise we had no water, and our Men being still sick, we could stay little longer for them. Last night died Lawrence Carney of a malignant Fever. There is hardly a man in the Ship who had been ashore at Guiaquil, but has felt something of this distemper, whereas not one of that were not there have been sick. Finding that Punch did preserve my own Health, I prescribed it freely among such of the Ship's Company as were well, to preserve theirs. Our Surgeons make heavy Complaints for want of sufficient Medicines, with which till now I thought we abounded, having a regular Physician, an Apothecary, and Surgeons enough, with all sorts of Medicines on board. Our Owners believed so too, and did often at home set forth the uncommon Advantage we had in being so carefully provided for this tedious Voyage; but now we found it otherwise, and had not sufficient Medicines to administer for the recovery of our sick Men, which so many being sick in both Ships, makes it a melancholy time with us. May 21. Yesterday at 5 in the Afternoon we ran to the Northward, and made another Island, which bore N. W. by W. distant 5 Leagues, and this Morning we sent our Boat ashore, to see for the lost Bark, Water, Fish, or Turtle. This day Thomas Hughes, a very good Sailor, died, as did Mr. George Underhill, a good proficient in most parts of the Mathematicks and other Learning, though not much above 21 years old. He was of a very courteous Temper, and brave, was in the fight where my brother was killed, and served as Lieutenant in my Company at Guiaquil. About the same time another young man called John English died aboard the Havre de Grace, and we have many still sick. If we had stayed in the Harbour, we should in all probability have lost near half of our Men. We had a good Observation, Latitude 0° 14' North. May 25. Yesterday at 6 in the Evening our Boat returned from the Island without finding any Water, or seeing the Bark. About 4 in the Morning we stood to another Island, that bore about N.E. distant 4 Leagues, and the Dutchess went to view another to the S.W. of it. Last night Peter Marshall, a good Sailor, died. This morning our Boat with Mr. Selkirk's Bark went to another Island to view it. We had an Observation, Latitude 0° 35' North. May 26. Last night our Boat and Bark returned, having rounded the Island, found no Water, but plenty of Turtle and Fish. This morning we joined the Dutchess, who had found no Water. About 12 o'clock we compared our Stocks of Water, found it absolutely necessary to make the best of our way to the Main for some, then to come off again, and so much the rather, because we expected that 2 French Ships, one of 60 and another of 40 Guns, with some Spanish Men of War, would suddenly be in quest of us. May 27. At 6 last night the Body of the Easternmost Island bore S. E. by S. distant 4 Leagues, from whence we took our Departure for the Main. Last night died Paunceford Wall, a Landman. A fresh Gale at S. E. with cloudy Weather. May 30. Fair Weather with moderate Gales from the S.S.E. to the S. by E. We are forced to water the Bark and Galleon every day with our Yawl. 'Tis a very great trouble to hoist our Boat out daily, now that our Men are so very weak. Signor Morell and the other Prisoners tell us, that it frequently proves calm between these Islands and the Terra Firma at this time of the Year, which if it should now happen but for a few days, would very much incommode us for want of Water. Had we supply'd our selves well at Point Arena, we should no doubt have had time enough to find the Island St. Maria de la Quada, reported to be one of the Galapagos, where there is plenty of good Water, Timber, Land and Sea Turtle, and a safe Road for Ships. This was the Place we intended for, and would have been very suitable to our Purpose, which was to lie some time conceal'd. It's probable there is such an Island, because one Captain Davis, an Englishman, who was a buccaneering in these Seas above 20 Years ago, lay some Months and recruited here to content. He says that it had Trees fit for Masts, but these sort of Men and others I have conversed with, or whose Books I have read, have given very blind or false Relations of their Navigation and Action in these Parts, for supposing the Places too remote to have their Stories disproved, they imposed on the credulous, amongst whom I was one, till now I too plainly see, that we cannot find any of their Relations to be relied on. Therefore I shall say no more of these Islands, since by what I saw of 'em, they don't at all answer the Description that those Men have given us. Nothing more remarkable happened till the 6th of June, but that Thomas Morgan, a Welch Landman, died the 31st of May, George Bishop, another Landman, the 4th of June, and that we had advice from some of our Men on board the Galleon, that the Prisoners and Blacks there had form'd a plot to murder the English, and run away with the Ship in the night. We examined the Spaniards who positively denied it, yet some of the Blacks owned there had been such a Discourse betwixt some Negroes and Indians, but they did not believe they were in earnest: so we contented our selves to disperse those Prisoners into several Ships, as the best way to break the Cabal. June 6. Yesterday at 4 a Clock in the Afternoon we spy'd a Sail, and at the same time we saw the Land, the Dutchess being a Mile a head, gave chase first. We followed, and about 7 in the Evening the Dutchess took her. We immediately sent our Boat aboard, and took out some of the Prisoners. She was a Vessel of about 90 Tun, bound from Panama to Guiaquil, called the St. Thomas de Villa Nova, and St. Dimas Juan Navarro Navarrete Commander. There were about 40 People aboard, including 11 Negro Slaves, but little of European Goods, except some Iron and Cloth. Captain Courtney sent to tell me, the Prisoners he had knew nothing of our being in these Seas, and brought no News from Europe, but confirm'd the Story that they expected the Arrival of a Squadron from England, my Lord Peterborough, Admiral and General, by Sea and Land, which was dreaded every day, and that they were inform'd he designed to secure some Port in the North Sea, and send part of his Squadron to the South Sea. They had a Passenger of note on board, called Don Juan Cardoso. He was going to be Governor of Baldivia, and said he had been taken not long before in the North Sea by Jamaica Cruisers. We bore away by agreement for the Island Gorgona. This Morning we saw Gallo, near the Shore, a small Island, and the Main to the North of it, which by the Shore is low Land. Our late Prize ran aboard the Havre de Grace, and lost her Main Top mast, but did little damage to the other Ship. The Dutchess took the Prize into a tow. We had a good Observation, Latitude 2° 0' North. End of Section 11.